It's Friday, and that means Josh Yohe of The Athletic is here to discuss everything regarding the Pittsburgh Penguins in day 2 of training camp, and it all starts right after this.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome back to this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes. You can follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes. You can follow the show's Twitter at Illinois Penguins. To my right is my co-host, Patrick Damp. You can follow him on Twitter at Synonym for Wet. Of course, thank you all so much for making this your first listen/watch of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sports betting partner of Locked On. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. And just a little below me here is the man, the myth, the legend, Josh Yohe himself from The Athletic, welcoming him back after, I guess, a couple of months away from the show. But, we are in full training camp mode right now. Day 2 of practice was today. Josh, really excited to have you back on.
Hunter, it's good to be here. I need some stability in my life, which is why I'm here. I'm going to miss camp tomorrow. Do you know why?
Why?
I have to go to my cousin's wedding in Kentucky. I don't know if there's going to be hillbillies there, if there's going to be shotguns, if there's going to be moonshine. I don't know what my weekend is going to serve for me. So at least right now I can just relax and talk with my pals about the first 2 days of training camp.
There might be all of that down there, Josh.
I'd be disappointed if there weren't.
Hey, got to be careful driving through that new tropical storm, because that's where I'm going to have to. I'm going down to my mom's tomorrow in Northern Virginia, and they're going to get hit pretty hard by that new storm that's coming up the coast. So that's going to be fun, at least for that kind of drive. But day 2 of training camp was today. Josh, what was the biggest thing that stood out to you for today's camp? I know it's early, it's only the second day, but what was your big takeaway from today's practices?
Boy, lots of things. It's so early in camp that I always caution people not to get too carried away by what they see. But what I saw today in particular, they do a scrimmage at 10 o'clock every morning, and Evgeni Malkin looked fabulous today, in fact. And he and Reilly Smith, man, were they clicking today. And again, it's only a couple of practices, but you could perhaps see the early signs of some chemistry forming there. It's very clear Mike Sullivan wants those two to play together, and it's obvious why. And we know Sid wants to play with Jake, and that's going to be your top line. So Smith and Malkin clearly are going to be on the second line, probably with Raquel, although I think Raquel and Rust are kind of interchangeable. We'll see both of them on those lines. I just liked everything I saw from Smith and Malkin today. Reilly Smith is kind of a straight line player. He just does everything well. He's kind of big. He's kind of fast. He's a pretty good finisher. And Malkin was looking for him and finding him all morning long. They looked really good together, and I think Mike Sullivan was really happy with what he saw too. So I think some encouraging signs from what we might see on the second line.
So it's the thing that everybody's talked about. Everybody wants to know. We might as well just get it out of the way early. Erik Karlsson's a Penguin, Josh, and even though, again, only 2 days, what are you seeing from him? Because we've seen some clips and some tweets or X's if you're so inclined, but it looks like he's making an impression early.
Oh, yeah, as expected. A couple of things. Whenever his team gets the puck in the scrimmage, no matter where on the ice the puck is or who has it, the dude just takes off. Like, he's jumping into the rush every single time. I mean, there's no hesitation. It's who he is. I talked with Marcus Pettersson about it. He's like, yeah, I'm not going to be joining the rush much this year. He knows he's sitting back, right? So that's why, even more than Letang, he literally looks like a forward the second the Penguins get the puck. No, he's been really good. Just watching him today, he's so good in tight quarters. Like, he had the puck in the left corner in the offensive zone, and people were charging after him, and he just sidesteps them back and forth like it's nothing. He doesn't look like anyone else on the ice. Really good form. I was actually talking after practice today with Ty Smith. I said, what do you think about Karlsson? He said, I'm supposed to be working on my own drills, but you can't help but watch the guy when he's on the ice. He just looks so different than anyone else. And he made this one play in the scrimmage yesterday. He has the puck behind the goaltender in his defensive zone on the left side, on the left wall. And he just real slowly skates kind of diagonally to the center of the ice and then to the middle of the rink to the right side, and the defense swings over with him. Then he just snaps this little pass like 90 feet to a left wing. I forget who it was, some guy who's never going to play in the NHL. The kid had no idea the puck was coming. He totally whiffed on the pass because he's like, how'd you make that play? You could just see the way he, the creative mind that he has. It's just different than anyone else's, and it has been a blast watching him the first 2 days of camp.
It's all gas, no breaks with him, I think, at this point. You're going to see that every game, I think, this season, to be honest.
He is who he is. You know? I mean, he's going to the Hall of Fame for a reason. It's not because he's a great two-way player that he's going to sit back. So, no, he's been a lot of fun to watch. And it looks to me, and we kind of could have guessed this, I guess, you're going to see Letang and Graves on the ice a lot with Crosby, and you're going to see Pettersson and Erik Karlsson on the ice with Evgeni Malkin an awful lot.
That's going to help Evgeni Malkin so much. And Pat and I have discussed this a lot on the show recently, too. Evgeni Malkin has never played with a defenseman this good so often during a season, because usually it is always Letang hogged up by Crosby, because that's just how it's been. Evgeni Malkin kind of gets this quote-unquote scraps, if you will. Not really scraps, obviously, here, but, he played a lot with Jeff Petrie last year. Before that, he played some with John Marino and, going years back, it's other people. But this year, a healthy dose of Erik Karlsson, I think that could lead to Evgeni Malkin having an even better year this year than he was last year if he stays healthy.
I do too. The day after the Karlsson trade, I happened to be in Boston at Kevin Stevens' golf event, and lo and behold, Mike Sullivan was there. So I did the whole, hey, Sully, I'm not trying to bug you in the offseason, but you just traded for a Hall of Famer. Do you have a minute to talk about it? And, of course, he did. And one of the very first things Sullivan said was, boy, is this a big deal for Gino. And he even told me Crosby and Malkin were the first two people to text Sullivan when the trade went through. He said they are giddy. And you're right, Letang always does play with Sid. And that's, it's best defenseman, best forward. Sure, it makes sense. Karlsson, though, you insert him now. And we know Karlsson's great on the power play, and a lot of people talk about that. But really, I think what separates him is just the 5-on-5 offense that he creates from the blue line. And Malkin's never played with anyone like that. And I have to think it's going to enhance his production this season pretty significantly. I can't wait to watch it. And as we've been saying all along, Hunter, I think it was you who tweeted it the other day, like, we're only a few days away from seeing Chris Letang and Erik Karlsson on the ice for 80% of the time. That's a real thing. And just the hockey fan in me, I can't wait to watch the Penguins this season because of that.
I mean, you wrote it, I wrote it. It just felt almost predetermined. Like this was the most Pittsburgh Penguin thing to ever Pittsburgh Penguin. Like we don't do the whole lock it down, the whole get a defensively accountable guy. It's like, no, we're going to beat you 8-7 and we do not care. But with that in mind, with the defense and the bottom six, it's something Hunter and I have been racking our brains over. You can see that Kyle Dubas signed a bunch of PTOs, bottom six guys. Obviously Karlsson was the big splash, but he did a lot of depth signing, and we all know how much of a liability the bottom six was last season. So anybody in particular standing out through the first 2 days that you think might have a shot, somebody we won't expect that could fill a bottom six role or bottom defensive pairing role?
Well, yeah, first of all, the bottom six is going to look a lot different. I don't think there's any question about that. I'm fascinated by the third line because I think I already know what the fourth line is. I think it's a Curry centering, don't get mad, Jeff Carter and Matt Nieto. I really think that's the fourth line. The third line, it's going to be Lars Eller at center. The question becomes who flanks him on either wing. And, it could be, guys, that the whole key to the bottom six could be Drew O'Connor. Like I just keep waiting for this guy to kind of erupt, right? Because you see him, I see him every training camp. It's like, man, this guy's got serious talent. Like, he's a big kid. He can skate. He can do everything. And then when the regular season comes, he hasn't played poorly, but he's never really put it all together. He also doesn't get a lot of ice time sometimes, so that makes it difficult. And frankly, he was surrounded by crap on the bottom six last year, which I suspect did not help. I'm waiting for him to make that jump. I think it could make a huge difference. And one guy, there's a few candidates. Colin White's a guy that through 2 days of camp, I've really liked what I've seen from him. We know he's pretty good defensively. He's not going to light it up offensively, though he did score a goal in a scrimmage yesterday. He was good enough to play every playoff game for the Florida Panthers, who made it to the Stanley Cup final. That tells me he should be good enough to play in this bottom six. I'm curious to see if he makes the team or not, what kind of a role he has. Through 2 days, I've kind of liked what I've seen from him, though.
He's an interesting name, someone who doesn't bring too much offense. He did for a time a little earlier on in his career, but it's gone down a little bit recently. It's kind of in tune with a lot of their other bottom six moves this offseason. But I think that'll wrap up this first segment. Coming up in the second segment, we're going to get into the mindset of the big three with training camp starting and some of the other roster battles that are taking place, including backup goalie with how Alex Nedeljkovic maybe did on day 2, plus who is the top favorite to play with P.O. Joseph on the third pairing, assuming P.O. Joseph wins that battle with Ty Smith. And I think at this point, he's probably winning that right now. But before we get to that, we got to talk about Bird Dogs. They make you look ridiculously good. They stretch khaki shorts, and they are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. They fit way better than regular shorts that are made of a stiff or straightened cotton. They also fix this issue by inventing cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki but stretches, so you get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. They also use anti-stink sweat wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. They're also functional for any occasion. I've gotten to wear them out to bars. I've worn them out to just any event, road trips, concerts, whatever you want. They are truly some of the most comfortable shorts out there. You can go to birddogs.com/lockedonnhl or enter promo code lockedonnhl at checkout for a free Bird Dogs water bottle with your order. That's birddogs.com/lockedonnhl for a free water bottle at checkout. You will not want to take your Bird Dogs off. We promise you that. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm Hunter Hodes, joined as always by my co-host Patrick Damp, and our guest today is Josh Yohe from The Athletic. So, Josh, Pat and I kind of hinted at this a little bit on Thursday, but we also discussed some other players with their mindset heading into camp. But when it comes to the big three overall, it seems like, just to me, they definitely have something more to prove this year. They took the end of last year really personally, and they just really weren't used to obviously what happened at the end of the season. What do you think their mindset is, heading into camp and obviously through the first couple of days of camp? Because based on some of their interviews so far, they seem pretty fired up to get this thing started.
Do they ever? We have not heard from Gino yet, who does not speak to the media quite as often as the others, although he does much more than he used to. I bet he'll talk tomorrow. If I were a betting man, Gino always likes to talk on the first Saturday of training camp because there's no media there, because everyone's like at college football games and stuff. That's a little more comfortable for him. I bet he'll talk tomorrow. But talking with Crosby and Letang the last couple of days, there is very clearly an enthusiasm that was not there last season. They're future Hall of Famers. They're these larger-than-life people in the game. But in some ways, they're just like the fans. And they were aware that team wasn't good enough to do anything last season. They were aware that Ron Hextall and Brian Burke were in over their heads. They knew that. Of course they knew that. And I felt like by the end of the season, those three and Mike Sullivan were as united as ever. But they kind of felt like, hey, can somebody please give us some help here? And along came Kyle Dubas. And now there is some help, I think. So there is a feeling of enthusiasm. That same enthusiasm that the fan base clearly has right now, I sense it in that locker room in a big, big way. They think this team can be good. How good? Who knows? I don't think they know yet. But yes, the mindset is clearly a very positive one, and their physical conditioning. You always worry about their ages at this point, but first 2 days of camp, they look an awful lot like Crosby, Malkin, and Letang.
Yeah, you wrote about it today in your observations about how Sullivan said this might be the most competitive group we've ever put together going into camp. So with him saying that, this applies to him, applies to the big three, applies to Karlsson. We know the big move this summer was getting Kyle Dubas. It didn't seem like that was going to be a thing. We had it looked like all signs pointed to him staying in Toronto, but then he comes here. Have you heard or seen anything about the relationship these guys all have? Obviously it's early and there's kind of still a honeymoon phase of this guy's new, he made a big move, but how does that relationship seem to be forming with all of them?
Well, I mean, I know for a fact Crosby really likes Kyle Dubas for one thing, and he has spoken glowingly of him in the past. And I had more than one person in the organization tell me like he was just thrilled when the Penguins were able to get this guy. He thinks he's great. And everything's rosy right now. I mean, we know if you've ever read anything I've written or just paid attention to the Penguins over the years, Crosby, Malkin, and Letang are incredibly close. Like I always tell people, you don't know how tight they are. Like they're not just teammates. The bond between those three, like I was right before Christmas last year, the Penguins played a game in Raleigh on a Sunday afternoon. And the day before I saw the three of them walking to the mall to go Christmas shopping together. Like they're besties. They really are. And
I'd watch that sitcom.
Shopping with Gino. Yeah. Gino's credit card has a very high limit. This is going to be a fun day. So those three are so close, and Dubas, they're so excited about him. And they're also so close with Sullivan. And there's this nice little circle, right? And Karlsson, I'll tell you what, everybody likes him. And I know for a fact Crosby and Malkin and Letang, they all had a little bit of a relationship with him. And they had nothing but good things to say. They were all really encouraging the move. And Karlsson, it was my favorite line from Karlsson's press conference back in August. He said, well, I've got to know those three from numerous all-star games. Like, you're great when you're at numerous all-star games. Over the years, you get to know these guys.
Just a little bit of a flex.
And I don't sense that Letang and Karlsson are going to have any issues. 10 years ago, maybe. I don't know if Letang would have been thrilled about this 10 years ago. He is so different now. He is a different person, I'm telling you. You talk about people who just want to win. As Sullivan said it yesterday talking about Karlsson, he said, every conversation I've had with this guy about strategy or different drills or his off season, all he does is talk about the Stanley Cup. It's all he cares about. It's literally all he talks about. So they're all on the same page right now. There's as the young people like to say, there's a lot of positive vibes right now around the Pittsburgh Penguins.
There we go, Josh. There we go. You just got to wait for people to start saying that Erik Karlsson is him this season on social media. That's what you got to be waiting for. But no, I can't wait to see him just play a live game for the Penguins, and seeing him and Chris Letang out there late in games, whether it's the power play or even a 6-on-5 if they're trailing or something like that. That's just going to be a sight for sore eyes, because both of them out there at the point guiding the offense. I've been waiting for something like that for a long time. And Sidney Crosby and Erik Karlsson, I feel like, have always been close. I mean, I'm sure you remember the handshake they had. Game 7, 2017, Karlsson goes up to him and just says, hey, go win another one. And, he gave him a pretty long hug in the handshake line. He's always had a lot of respect for someone like Sid. And I think that's carried over, obviously, now that they're teammates. And, someone like Karlsson, he's won everything except the Stanley Cup. And that's why he wanted out of San Jose. He knew that team was not going to be good. They're projected to have the worst record in the league. If you look at some of the articles from Dom and Sean and Shayna from their previews from The Athletic, now he's on a team that's potentially going to be a contender this year. You can't help but feel, super happy for him and just all the core players involved. But
no, and by the way, Hunter, Patrick, I got to give ESPN some credit. I'm often critical of them. Opening night, we got Connor Bedard against Erik Karlsson making his debut in Pittsburgh. I can't wait. That's going to be incredible.
I do think Connor Bedard is going to be incredible. All signs point to it. But man, if there were ever a welcome to the NHL kid moment, he's going to walk out to Crosby, Malkin, Letang, Erik Karlsson. And that's just it's funny because these guys have been around for so long for us now. We take them for granted. You know, he's going to say multiple times in the lead up to that game, "Oh yeah, I grew up watching those guys," and we're all going to go, "What's the age limit for AARP again?"
I said it might be a good night to bet the over.
Oh God, yeah.
Yes.
I just have a feeling there's going to be some fireworks on October 10th.
With how young he is, I feel old, and I'm only going to be 26 this year. That's just
yeah, we know.
Yeah. But switching gears a little bit, Josh, the competition for the third pairing this year, that's one of the big competitions for this camp in the preseason. I think we all assume P.O. Joseph is going to take up half of that pairing, unless you're seeing something from Ty Smith in camp so far that's saying otherwise. I know he has some offensive skill, but defensively, I would put POJ a bit higher than him at this point. But on the right side, you got Chad Ruhwedel, who I personally think is the favorite. You got Mark Pysyk, who is on the PTO. Mark Friedman can play there, but I know Mike Sullivan likes to play him on his offside. What are you seeing so far from that competition, and who do you think the favorite is, I guess, at this point? Obviously, there's a long way to go, but what are you seeing?
You know, Ruhwedel is the safe choice. I'm not so sure Pysyk isn't the favorite, though. He was really good today. He certainly has more of an offensive game than Ruhwedel, and even more so than Friedman, I would say. He's a former first-round pick. He's never, I wouldn't say he's had a great NHL career, but he's been okay. I've really liked what I've seen from him, the way he can skate. I think the Penguins want him to be the guy because I think to them, Ruhwedel is more valuable as a number 7 guy. And that's not a knock on him. Not everybody can go a month and go into the lineup and do a serviceable job. Ruhwedel can. So I think that's probably what we're looking at right now. It is a very interesting competition. As for the left side, I think PO is certainly the likely candidate there. I don't get the sense the coaching staff or the organization is thrilled with Ty Smith. It's not personal. I think they were a little disappointed last season in what he brought to the table. They really don't like his work in the defensive zone. I mean, that's pretty clear to me. You can see watching today, and he jumps into the play, and he can really handle the puck well. He's got a lot of talent, but he was a very big defensive liability his last season in New Jersey. And I think maybe he's made some minor strides, but I don't think they're completely comfortable with him just yet. And I'd be surprised if he got past PO. And PO still has a lot to prove. I thought he really wore down in the second half of last season. He's not bad, though. He can certainly do some things. My biggest concern with the blue line, we know how good the top 4 is. And I think if you have Pysyk and PO, that's an okay third pairing. Who's going to kill the penalties? Like, PO's not a good penalty killer. Karlsson's not a good penalty killer. Yeah, and Letang can kill penalties, and he's going to have to. So, Graves and Pettersson obviously are very good penalty killers. I only bring this up. It makes me wonder. People talk about the power play and Letang and Karlsson maybe being together on it. I wonder if when everyone's healthy, if they don't just go Karlsson as the only defenseman on the top power play. Partially, well, I think Raquel's really good in the power play, but also you got to watch Letang's minutes a little bit. I know he never gets tired. He's Chris Letang, but maybe because he's going to have to kill penalties, maybe a little more than in the past, he might have to watch his minutes, and maybe the power play is the place to do that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I also think when it comes to PO, I think he's got a really good mentor in Chris Letang. Yes, I agree. He wore down pretty heavily at the end of last year, but by all accounts, it seems like Chris Letang's treating him as a son. So he's seeing the way that guy trains, the way that guy takes care of himself. I think that's going to be an underrated factor for PO going into this season.
No, you're absolutely right. Letang, I always tell people, Chris Letang, I never disliked Chris. I don't mean to imply that. He has grown up so much in the last 5 years. He's a different guy now. I don't know if it was being a father or if it was all the stuff he's dealt with off the ice, what it was. But he was the guy, like, right when the NHL came back from COVID, I think the first full season after COVID, he was literally having one-on-one meetings. And if there were any players who hadn't gotten the vaccine, he wanted to talk with them to let them know that they were getting the vaccine, and here was the medical reasons why. And he's like very, very fatherly. And with PO, like he works out with him in the summer. He really is taking him under his wing. And it was interesting talking with Ty Smith today. He told me that Karlsson's done a little bit of that with him. Karlsson and Letang are not just two of the most important players on the team, but they're really trying to mentor some of the younger guys on this blue line, which you love to hear. So yes, there is some real, the word leadership gets a little overused in sports, but I think you are seeing some of it there. And PO has talent. I'd like to see him have a little bit more of a green light in the offensive zone.
Same.
I really think he can do some things offensively. And I feel like he was holding back a little bit last season, perhaps out of fear of, messing up in the defensive zone, whatever. And that happens with young defensemen. But I really think he can play. I just don't know if he can do it for 82 games. I mean, he needs to prove it. He's a small guy. We always talk about that, but there is not a lot of muscle. It's just the DNA thing. It's not that he doesn't work hard. He's just got kind of a frail build for an NHL player. So does Marcus Patterson. And we've seen Marcus over the years, I think, learn to last all 82 games and he used to wear down too in the second half. We didn't see that last year. Hopefully that'll be the case with PO. If he can have a little bit of a breakout season, I mean, man, what a big deal that would be for a blue line that I think is already really good.
Yeah, I hope he gets more involved offensively this year. I thought still last year he was better offensively than he was defensively. I think in his own zone, he was lacking a little bit, losing some of those one-on-one matchups that he probably shouldn't at that stage of his career, even though he's still really young. I still think he should have been winning some more matchups. But if he does get more of a green light offensively, maybe he gets some work on power play too. If someone gets hurt or something like that, I would maybe look at that as well. One of the other big, I guess, competitions, if you want to call it during camp though, Josh, last thing we'll get to before we head to a break. Backup goalie spot behind Tristan Jarry. We finally have a new goalie tandem for the first time in quite some time now with Casey DeSmith out of the picture. He's with Vancouver after the Canucks found a way to trade for him out of Montreal earlier this week. It looked like Alex Nedeljkovic had a really good second day of camp. There was some video that the Penguins posted on their social media. He was out there sprawling, making some really nice saves, looking like the goalie that I kind of saw in Carolina and Detroit. He makes those saves that you're like, wow, oh my God, this is just crazy. But then he'll let in some of the stinkers where it's like, man, you shouldn't really be letting those in. I hope that he keeps making those sprawling saves during the season if he wins the job and, of course, cleans up some of the stinkers. But who would you say, I guess, is the favorite right now after a couple of days and after watching him and Magnus Hellberg?
Oh, I think Nedeljkovic has a huge favorite, probably. I had that sense before camp. He was the presumed guy, and I still think that he is. I thought he was really good the first 2 days, in fact. He's interesting. He's one of those guys. He's got talent. You can see it. You watch. I'm not a goalie expert by any stretch, by the way. I will tell you that now. But I watch him play. You can see the talent. Yeah. He played in Carolina, and they have a way of making goalies look really good. And he played in Detroit. And they have a way of making their goalies look pretty bad the last few years. So it's hard to get a feel. Wasn't he the goalie in the 11-goal game a couple of years ago?
Yes.
Yeah. Yep. So I think he's more physically gifted than Casey DeSmith. That's not a knock on Casey, but Casey was one of the smallest goalies in the league. And, sometimes you'd watch him play and you could see from the press box, well, there's a gigantic gaping hole to shoot at. He's not that big. So I think this is probably an upgrade. I think he'll be the guy. That said, there's some depth now between the pipes and the organization that we really haven't seen that much of the last few years. We all know Tristan's health and the way he performs is arguably the most important variable for this team. But my gosh, there's something to be said for having some depth behind him, especially with the health issues he's had the last couple of years. And I think you're going to see that.
Yeah, I always kind of likened it to the way both Fleury and Murray were. They always kind of seemed to be at their best when there was somebody that maybe not legitimately could, but plausibly could take their job. And I kind of feel like that's going to be a similar situation for Jarry this year, that when he's got someone like Nedeljkovic behind him. I
think so. Jim Rutherford always used to tell me, point blank, Matt Murray is better when somebody's pushing him. We don't want Matt to be comfortable. Matt Murray was at his best when old number 29 was sitting there on the bench, right? I mean, he was. You can't deny that. So maybe there's something to that with Jarry. I'm fascinated to see what we witnessed from Jarry this season. The last time he was under this kind of microscope, I think, was after the Islanders debacle, and he responded with his best regular season in 21-22. He was great that year, and I'm convinced if Anders Lee doesn't break Jarry's foot, I think they beat the Rangers in the first round. Not so sure they don't beat Carolina in the second round that year. They weren't playing very well. Who knows? So we've seen Jarry when the stakes are raised a little bit in terms of people questioning him, he tends to respond pretty favorably. And I know people were questioning him after this contract now. I think we all agree of all the great things Dubas did this offseason, the one thing people weren't sure about was that contract for Tristan Jarry. So there's a lot of pressure on him. We'll see how he responds. He looks fine in camp. He looks healthy. That's the first step. But, boy, it's going to be interesting.
He just has to stay healthy throughout the season so that he can bounce back. I mean, that's just been the biggest thing. And, I think before these injury situations really came up, he didn't really seem like someone who would get hurt very often. I think this was just a very recent thing with him, just with the broken foot. And then you had the bad luck last year with, whatever, the groin and the back and all that stuff. But I think he definitely does have something pretty big to prove this year. Yeah. If he is on his A game, this team could potentially do some real damage in the NHL this year. And speaking of that, we're going to get Josh's thoughts on the seasonal outlook right after this. All right, and we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am Hunter Hodes. To my right is Patrick Damp, and below me is Josh Yohe of The Athletic. So, Josh, I think a lot of people have just different expectations for the Penguins heading into the season. I've seen some people say that, they can maybe win the Metro this year, even though Carolina and New Jersey are very good. I've seen some people say, they can maybe challenge for that third spot or be a wild card team. And I've seen some people say, nope, this is the end. They're going to miss the playoffs. When it comes to your view on the team, after everything Kyle Dubas did over the summer and maybe stuff he still could do at the trade deadline, because I don't think he's going to be satisfied with his team by then, do you think that they are a playoff team heading into this year right now?
Yeah, Hunter, I do. They're not going to win the division because they don't care about winning the division.
Right.
They just don't. They never have. I think they're just better in so many different departments this season. That top four on the blue line is way better this season. The bottom six is better, especially defensively. And because of those guys that have come in, the penalty kill is going to be better. Erik Karlsson's going to make the power play better. So they're just better in so many departments. And Tristan Jarry, theoretically, is healthy now and will be better. Yeah, I think they're a playoff team. I really do. And could they do damage in the playoffs? Sure, they could. I always say if the Penguins can just win one series, and it's been, since 2018, it's been a long time, they can just win one and get hot in the playoffs. If Crosby and Malkin can just sniff it one last time, who knows? I could see them pushing the clock back a little bit and making a run. It's conceivable. It's in play. The biggest problem for the Penguins, the Eastern Conference is so frighteningly good and so deep. I mean, in the Atlantic alone, you've got Toronto, Tampa, Florida, Boston. I really like Ottawa and Buffalo. Those teams are good. Then you've got Carolina, Jersey. The Rangers are still formidable. I don't think the Islanders or Capitals stink. It's an unbelievably grueling conference. So I don't think they're going to just waltz their way into the playoffs. I don't think many teams are going to. I just think it's going to be a battle every night. And if you love hockey, oh, my God, these Eastern Conference games this season, I mean, it's going to be unbelievable. I don't remember a time when there were this many good teams in one conference. So it's going to be tough, but I just think the Penguins are going to score 1 million goals this year, and I really do. And I think they, barring any massive injuries, I think they're a playoff team for sure.
Yeah, I think that playoffs are about the expectation this year and not just because of the roster. I just think, looking at it, they're going to get back. I also do think there is a good shot they can finish third in the division just because, like you said, I mean, I don't think the Islanders or Capitals stink, but I don't think they're as good as they were last year. And unless they get the Laviolette bump, I think the Rangers took a step back too. So I think there's a real chance for this team to get a third place finish in the Metro.
The Rangers are old. I don't think he was a very inspired hire as head coach, quite honestly. They've got some issues. As long as they have that goaltender, I still think they're a playoff team. But yeah, I mean, the Penguins could very easily finish third. I don't know that they'll catch Carolina or Jersey. Carolina is such of a regular season machine. I think they just are.
Yeah.
Jersey's really good. I don't think they're going anywhere. But, we'll see what happens. And I feel like the Penguins are so motivated and they have made upgrades. And I also feel like whether they get off to a terrible start or if they get off to a great start or whatever, Kyle Dubas is going to be aggressive. He really is. We saw it in his last year in Toronto. We've seen it here. He's like morphing into Jim Rutherford more and more every year. He's going to make moves. He'll do whatever it takes to make them better. And the Penguins, they just feel like they have a lot to prove. I think they were embarrassed by what happened last season. So I think they're a playoff team for sure, and that'll be a great theater no matter who they would get in the first round.
And I know some people definitely want to see, even outside Pittsburgh, would probably want to see one more last hurrah for the core players here before they ride off into the sunset with all the trophies that they have, not just Stanley Cups, of course. I do have a fun question for you, just for this. Who gets more points this year, Sidney Crosby or Erik Karlsson?
So ESPN said Karlsson, right? That's other little projections. I would probably say Crosby. I think Karlsson will certainly put up numbers. I don't know that he's going to put up 100 points again. Some people were kind of assuming that that's a rare thing to do, but I think he'll be a point-per-game player. I would guess Karlsson and Malkin both around 80 points. Crosby probably closer to 95, maybe 100 in that range. As long as Guentzel was back, which I think Jake might be coming back a lot sooner than people think, which will only help Sidney Crosby's offensive output. So I would still probably give the nod to Sid there, but it will be fun to watch for sure. And listen, it's Erik Karlsson. I was watching training camp today and I actually said to myself, this is so weird. There's Erik Karlsson in a Penguins jersey down there. This is wild. Like it still doesn't look real that he's here. But that's the beauty of the Penguins organization. They know how to bring the star power in, and it's going to be a fun season. It really is.
Hold on, I got to circle back on that. You think Jake Guentzel is going to be back for like when?
Okay, so here's what we know publicly, right?
People want to know.
Mike Sullivan and Kyle Dubas have both projected he will miss around the first 5 games of the season. That would have him back October 24th against Dallas. Maybe that's the timeline. I can just tell you, like he's been skating before the Penguins skate in Cranberry. You wouldn't know there was anything wrong with him. You really wouldn't. He looked great. So I hate saying, hey, I think this guy might be back by such and such day because it's not fair to put pressure on them. And we don't know what portions of the ankle might be vulnerable. Maybe he's just not allowed to skate even though he looks good. If he were to return before October 24th, opening day, I don't know. But if he's back before the 24th, I would not be surprised just basing that on how he looks skating. He looks healthy to me. So I do not think this is a long-term thing.
Yeah, you just kind of casually dropped that in. So
we were not expecting him to already be skating and to look as good as he has looked. There's a sense of optimism that he's going to be back sooner rather than later.
And that's great news, obviously. There are so many people that were thinking, they're going to have to LTIR him and stuff like that if there was a minimum of 12 weeks. But
and for his sake, it's a contract year for him. Let's not forget that. And boy, is that going to be an interesting storyline as the season goes on, right? How much money is Jake going to want? How much money are the Penguins willing to give him? We know a certain captain of the hockey team doesn't want Jake going anywhere. But Jake's going to be 29 in a few weeks. He's not a kid, but he's right in his prime. So I don't know. It's going to be very interesting.
And I've seen some people say, oh, man, he's not going to get over $8 million or even $9 million. I'm like, have you seen the way he produces? Did you just see what Cole Caulfield just got from the Canadiens? And he's not even close to the goal scorer that Jake Guentzel is. And if Guentzel scores 50 this year, I predicted that last year, did not come to fruition. Maybe I'll do it again this year. But he scores 50 this year, Josh. We're talking probably maybe even $9.5 million per year, to be honest. And I know that's very risky. That's a lot of cash. You would be paying someone well into their 30s. It would be I think at that point, still a tough call. I would still lean towards doing it, but you're right. That's going to be a big time story.
Oh, it is. And maybe he'll take a little bit less. All his teammates do it too. I don't know. It's interesting. His agent, Ben Hankinson's in Pittsburgh right now. In fact, I don't think he's in Pittsburgh because of any contract talks. The USHL games are going on at the Penguins facility. I'm pretty sure that's why he's in town, though I did see him today. I know Jake wants to be in Pittsburgh, and I know Crosby, and everybody wants Jake to be in Pittsburgh. So my guess is it'll get done at some point. Will it be over $9 million? I don't think the Penguins want to pay him more than that, but who knows? That on the open market, man, that guy's getting paid. We all know it. I don't think the rest of the league considers him an extension of Crosby. Yeah, they play great together, but I think people acknowledge Jake Guentzel's a great player in his own right. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. How does it affect the milkshake factory? I don't know. These are the things we need to consider. I enjoy my half-off Jake shake on occasion, just like the rest of the listeners. So who knows?
Yeah, they had to be breathing a sigh of relief when it came out that he was going to miss a few games.
Oh yeah. Well, and the funny thing is, when that release came out, I think it was July or August. Like it made it sound like Guentzel was out for a long time. Like it really did. And then Dubas kind of settled things down when he talked and said, 5 games, he'll be back. I wonder if it'll be even before then. It wouldn't shock me.
And however long it is, whether it's even 1 or 2 games, 3 to 5, Josh, who do you think is the favorite? I think this is probably the last question I have for you. Who is the favorite you think to replace Guentzel for those first few games on Sidney Crosby's line? Is it Drew O'Connor? Is it Vinny Hinostroza? Because I've seen Mike Sullivan put him up there with Brian Rust to start training camp. Who do you think is a natural fit up there for the first few games?
I don't know that it's Vinny. He's right-handed, and Sid made a joke today, like that he's never played on a line with 2 right-handed guys, which he hasn't. But I don't know that he's comfortable with it necessarily. He loves having right-handed right wingers. I know he was joking, but I wonder how comfortable he was with those two. It's a great question. There's no obvious choice. There's really not. It's very clear on this team who the top 6 is when healthy. And the rest there's a big drop, right? Selfishly, I'd love to see Drew O'Connor get a few games there. Just out of curiosity, he has all the physical attributes, I think, to be effective in that role. I think he or Vinny would be the 2 most likely candidates, but there isn't an obvious choice, quite frankly. I wish there were. Maybe we won't need to find out. Who knows? But as deep as the Penguins are, there's always, you can't be deep everywhere, right? They have 6 really good top 6 guys, but there's no depth behind them. So it's certainly imperative that those guys stay pretty healthy this season.
Pat, do you have anything else?
No, not really. I think I'm happy we got to do this because every time I get to talk hockey with you, Josh, it's a blast.
Well, it is a pleasure, and I think I speak for most people when I say I'm a little more excited for this season than I have been in previous seasons. Like I can sense the buzz in the city for this team, and that's a great thing. And I'm telling you, that buzz is also evident in the locker room. They're really ready to go.
I know this is a football town. I also know the Steelers have been struggling on offense recently.
Really?
No.
I know. No, I can't believe
I haven't heard anything about this.
All right.
Yeah, I guess Matt Canada is a nobody in this town. How about that?
I couldn't tell you who that is. Never heard of him before.
The Penguins are coming right in the nick of time, I think, clearly. So.
Oh, you aren't kidding.
And the season's going to start in 2.5 weeks. I think even the diehard Steelers fans will be happy that the Penguins are coming back, just with how exciting this team should be this year. But
the season even starts right when the bye week starts for the Steelers. It's really central casting. It's perfect.
That is beautiful. That is, thank you, NFL schedule makers. That's how we do it right there. But I think that would do it for this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. Josh, where can everyone find you on social media, and what work do you have coming up on The Athletic?
Oh, it's always a pleasure, guys. Oh my gosh. Come to theathletic.com, find all the articles. I don't even know my Twitter name. Is it like Josh Yohe @_PGH Twitter?
There
I think. Or do we still call it Twitter? I still call it Twitter.
I do.
Go to The Athletic. Rob Rossi and I are doing kind of daily recaps of everything that we're seeing in training camp. In the next couple of weeks, I got all kinds of articles. I don't know exactly when they're going to run, but got some fun ones, catching up with our old friend Doc Emmerich, and little trip to the Sioux to talk with Kyle Dubas's family and some of people that really molded his childhood and stuff like that. So all kinds of good stuff on the way.
Those are going to be great, I'm sure. Pat and I can't wait to read them, and I'm sure everyone that's listening / watching this can't wait to read those either if they're subscribed to The Athletic, and if you're not, well, shame on you. But
for 6 weeks.
Yes, exactly. But that would do it for this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. Thank you for coming on, Josh. Thank you all so much for listening / watching. Pat and I will be back on Monday for another episode recapping the, I guess, 2 intra-squad preseason games on Sunday. There's one in Pittsburgh, and then there's one in Columbus, and we'll be recapping both and seeing who stood out, both good and bad. I'm not going to really be able to draw too many conclusions, but enough to say that, hey, who's looking good versus who could still use a little more oomph heading into more of the preseason. But again, thank you all so much for tuning in. We'll be back on Monday.